This horror story happened 7 years ago near Xingxing Farm, China. This experience was considered a memorable one. That year, I was heartbroken because my girlfriend of 2 years left me. I signed up for a 4-day tour in Guangxi province with a group of guests. Most of the people in the group were older men and women, and I was the only young man. After we walked around on the beach, the guide continued to take us to a farm on a large mountain to see the forest landscape. To me, it didn't matter where I went, as long as I left the city where I lived to forget about my story of heartache. Because of the city being so small, almost every corner had memories of my ex-lover and myself. After visiting the beautiful natural scenery of the farm, we were arranged to rest in a renovated hotel from the villa. The condition of this villa was good. It had an observatory outside. The scenery in the distance was beautiful. Thanks to that, my mood gradually improved. Actually, now that I thought about it, I felt stupid. I realized that in this world not everyone could walk together for a lifetime when in love. Maybe this was my first love, so it took me a long time to forget. On the farm, it got dark very quickly because it was surrounded by forest. It was especially quiet. The elders who accompanied us took an early break. There would be no excursions in this forest in the evening, so I slept early that night. I remember that I slept until midnight. After 11 o'clock, a humming sound suddenly woke me up. After being woken up, I couldn't go back to sleep. Once again, a particularly shrill sound resounded in the stillness of the night. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to get up and go outside to look for that sound. I wanted to see who did what to disturb people sleeping in the middle of the night. Following the sound that was coming from, I went to the back of the villa and saw that no one was there. In the backyard, there was only a large stone mill. I saw that no one else was there. I raised my ear to hear it, and the sound seemed to come from this mill. At that time, I found it a bit strange. This mill weighed several tons and seemed to have been thrown straight to the ground. How could there be a sound if no one moved? However, after I got close, I discovered a strange phenomenon. This large mill seemed to be covered with charms, although the rain and wind made them slightly fade the color. My house was also in the countryside, so I was not unfamiliar with this, but I had never seen such a peculiar stone mill. I could be sure the sound was coming from below the millstone. I kept putting my ear to the mill and listened. This sound was so shrill, like someone below was bumping into a big stone mill. This thing scared me. Was anyone here? Or was there a secret below? I thought. My curiosity also surfaced. I saw a cork on top of that large stone mill and knew that this was a screw hole. I didn't know what I was thinking at the time. I didn't hesitate at all to approach and unscrew the cork. As soon as the cork was pulled out, there was an explosion, and some cold air appeared. It seemed that the bottom was isolated from the outside world. How could the creature below survive? Humans or animals couldn't survive below this without air, so what exactly hit the rock underneath? How did that thing get down there? I put my eyes into the hole and peered under the stone to check. Sure enough, the bottom of the stone mill was empty, like a deep dark well that was hard to see. But after observing for a while, my eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness. When I saw everything in the well, I couldn't help but be startled. Under the well, there were dozens of human skulls. They thickly piled up. I didn't know how old these human skulls were. The black eye sockets of those skulls seemed to be looking at me, looking very scary. I felt that those skeletons had turned into resentful spirits. They were rushing towards the mouth of the well where I was looking down. This thing scared me. I quickly backed away and my eyes left the hole. However, at that moment I saw a dark cloud rush out of the mouth of the hole. The dark cloud hit me right in the eye, and I immediately felt a sting, a very uncomfortable feeling. After stinging my eyes, I felt dizzy. I tried to scratch my head and pull my hair. That feeling made me nauseous for a while. The world was spinning, my eyes were dark. At that time, I only had one thought, that was to return to my room quickly. But then my mind suddenly lost control and my body could not move anymore. There were many people talking in my ears, but I couldn't understand a word. Before I fell, two figures appeared in front of me. They asked me, "Why are you here at this hour?" They seemed to be talking about my situation and how to save me. I didn't remember anything anymore. "Looks like he did it," said one. While unconscious, I had a strange dream in my dream. I saw a group of Japanese soldiers walking into a small mountain village with guns in their hand. There were a few people dressed as villagers, hiding in the shadows and attacking the Japanese with stones and bricks. They used familiar terrain to attack quite effectively. Soon the Japanese soldiers had their heads smashed. The remaining Japanese soldiers panicked for a moment. Their formation became more chaotic. The Japanese soldiers were killed by unexpected stones thrown by the villagers. When the villagers hiding in the shadows ran out and killed the Japanese soldiers, they piled up Japanese soldiers' bodies. They cut off the heads of those Japanese soldiers. Their heads were covered in blood and looked terrible. The villagers threw the soldiers' heads into a dry well. The dry well in my dream was very similar to the deep well under the stone mill that I saw tonight. The heads fell and gradually disappeared into the deep darkness. I don't know how these images that only appeared in anti-Japanese dramas appeared in my dreams, but then I dreamt of the big stone mill. The whole of the great mill was constantly releasing black gas, and there were wailing voices. Finally, the wailing sound disappeared, but it became the thumping sound I heard tonight. The great mill was also full of curses. Everything was slowly becoming blurry. There were really souls in that deep well. After that, my consciousness seemed to have recovered a bit. Those strange dreams disappeared. I could hear people moving around, but my eyes couldn't open. I felt someone cut a small cut on my forehead with a sharp knife. Then the man burned a paper talisman over my head, and he put the paper talisman in a jar. I also didn't understand what this meant. Then, like a steamer, he pressed it to cut my forehead. I could almost feel my blood being sucked into the vacuum cup. I could be sure that my feeling was right at the time. But during the whole process, I couldn't keep my eyes open even though I wanted to. When I was fully awake, the sky was clear. I jumped out of bed and the story last night seemed to have never happened. But there was a sharp pain in my forehead. This wound reminded me that everything last night was not a dream. I covered my forehead and went to the villa owner to ask him what had happened. But from them I got a completely different answer from what I felt. The answer seemed reasonable, but I really couldn't accept it. I didn't know if I was thinking about that. I always felt that the villa owner was reluctant to tell the truth. I turned and ran into the yard, wanting to see the big mill from last night. But when I saw it, I was stunned. A large glass plate was placed around the stone mill. Looks like it was just brought in there, so it looked brand new. The cork that I remembered was pulled out last night was now pressed again. 2 new talisman symbols crossed across the cork. If everything went according to what the boss said, how could all of this be explained? After that, I went to ask the owner of the villa again. They said the stone mill was a cultural relic, and the paper talisman was used by villagers for blessings, not for exorcism. I knew I would be powerless because I had nothing to prove, so I stopped arguing with them. And when I went through that night, I didn't know what to say now. And as I experienced this night, I was left speechless.